Okay, as I said before, we're dealing with archaeology. You would define archaeology, most people define it as the study of the past through material culture. Material culture is anything physical that is a remnant of the ancient culture. So, are any kinds of artifacts, pottery, tools, architecture, writing, right? All of that is material culture. Especially in the prehistoric times, the time period before writing that we're going to look at, we have to rely on those basic artifacts, the animal bones, the pottery, the types of plant materials that were found, those kinds of things, in order to understand the past. And it's part of anthropology, as we said before. Even archaeologists who work in the Middle East who aren't in anthropology departments still use anthropology when they do their work in the Middle East, because anthropology has really had a dramatic change on archaeology through Americans working in the Middle East. That's, again, something else you'll read in that Matthews chapter. Anthropological archaeology is different from the archaeology that was practiced, as we already kind of talked about, in the 19th century. That archaeology and some European archaeology that's focused on the Middle East is focused on culture history. Right? What happened? When did it happen? Anthropology wants to look at the why questions. Right? Why did certain things happen? And also looking at the area in a cross-cultural perspective, comparing it to other parts of the world, using a diachronic perspective as well. That is looking over time to see what changes have occurred. So essentially, there's three basic goals. As we've taken Anthropology 220 or methods, our introductory methods class, you know that one of the first goals of anthropological archaeology is to compile culture histories. This is mainly what they were doing in the 19th century, right? What time period does this site date to? What happened at this site? What culture does it belong to? From that, anthropological archaeologists also want to figure out how people made a living, what their subsistence was like. We would call this a life way. And then the third part, which is where the scientific kind of analysis comes in, is explaining cultural change, right? That is, why did domestication of plants and animals occur during this period? Why not earlier? Why not later? Why in this part of the Middle East? Why not in another part of the Middle East? And so anthropological archaeology in the Middle East looks at some of these dramatic changes that occurred. The movement from nomadism, mobile hunters and gatherers, to sedentary hunters and gatherers, then the movement to domestication of plants and animals, or agriculture, the enlargement of villages and groups becoming more complex and larger until we get chiefdoms, and then we get states, and we get cities, and then eventually we get empires. So this overall trajectory up towards larger societies and more complex societies. So we already talked about the Near East and why it's so important and why it's important to study. The cradle of civilization, and also the cradle of agriculture. The origins of agriculture derived from the Middle East. Now, many other places in the world developed agriculture slightly later on their own, not just taking the agriculture from the Middle East. And the same with cities and civilizations. The Middle East probably developed the earliest cities and state societies or civilization, and also the earliest writing, but other places developed civilizations on their own later. Now, we also have to look at why did civilizations develop, let's say, in southern Mesopotamia in the 5th millennium BC. And we're going to see how historical process, but also the environment has a role to play. So in some ways, it's an interplay between ecology and also culture. Human agency and choice plays a large role. Historical preconditions play a large role, but the environment plays a role as well. Okay, we talked a little bit about the sort of misguided view of looking at the Middle East as simply a precursor to Western civilization. A lot of times when you learn history in middle school, for example, or high school, at least I remember when I learned it, it kind of went from ancient Sumer to Babylon, and then we learned about Persia, and then at the same time we learned about classical Greece, and then how Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire. Then we focused on the Roman Empire, and then really focused on Western medieval Europe, and then the Renaissance. Almost like it's an unbroken chain, and things were leading up to that point. And unfortunately, what this does is it ignores that, okay, after the Persian Empire was conquered by Alexander the Great, not long after that, Alexander the Great's empire was split in two. The Persian areas regained their independence, and you had the creation of the Parthian and Sasanian empires. So it's not like, just because people were focused on Rome, or students are focused on learning about Rome, like nothing else was going on outside of the Roman Empire. In fact, the Parthian Empire was a very fierce rival of the Roman Empire. And the Romans never moved into Parthian territory, which is now in modern-day Iran, because they could not defeat Parthian armies. Right? Then you get into later, Sasanian times during the Islamic period. And at the same time, we think about, Rome collapsing with the Visigoths. That's only the Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire over here, the Byzantine Empire, flourished until 1453 AD. Right? So some people, when you ask them when did the Roman Empire collapse, some people say 1453 AD, not 400 AD. And then also the Islamic world. Right? So there are many different, trajectories. Of course, the Middle East had a profound influence on ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and Western culture. But it wasn't like it was leading up to that point, the way we sometimes think of it. Right? There was no intentionality there. Okay, well, we're going to look, in order to understand how ancient civilizations developed in the Near East, the Middle East, Southwest Asia, however you want to call it, we have to understand the different environmental zones, a little bit about the modern cultures and peoples as well, and the geography and topography. Right? So the Middle East is a geographic region that is mostly defined as this area over here, right? Doesn't include North Africa, doesn't include parts of Central Asia like Afghanistan or South Asia, maybe a slight bit of Europe because of Anatolia over here, right? But you've got Asia Minor, you've got the Arabian Peninsula, right? And you also have the region of Mesopotamia over here. That is the Middle East. So it's bounded by these watery areas: the Mediterranean Sea, right? The Black Sea, the Caspian Sea over here, the Persian Gulf, and also the Red Sea over here, right? These kind of bound the area of the Middle East, right? So the Middle East is the connecting point for Europe over here, Asia, right? That's really kind of the end of Asia, and Africa, right? So it's a kind of the meeting place of several continents, and it's the tip of Asia. Important thing to keep in mind is that people use different terms and different definitions. If you're talking about the Islamic world, you're obviously talking about a much larger area. So in Middle East studies, like we have a Middle East Studies minor. I'm a faculty member in the Middle East Studies minor, and I can send you more information if you want to know more about the minor program. In the Middle East Studies minor, they will usually kind of refer to MENA or WANA, Middle East and North Africa, or Western Asia and North Africa. Right? And I believe the Middle East Studies minor just changed their designation from Middle East to Middle East and North Africa, right? Because these are Arab Muslim countries that have a lot of connection culturally to these areas of the Middle East. And so it doesn't make sense to only study these areas. If you're studying the modern Middle East, you usually have to learn about the areas of North Africa as well. Right? We're really going to focus on the Middle East. We might mention parts of North Africa like ancient Egypt and other places, but we're going to focus mainly on the Middle East or Near East or Southwest Asia or however you would like to call it. And one of the things that you have to understand is that the Middle East in ancient times and the Middle East today is extremely diverse in almost every possible way. It's diverse in geography, it's diverse in ecology, it's diverse in culture, it's diverse in lifeways or subsistence practices, it's diverse in terms of language groups, it's diverse in terms of ethnic groups. Many people, if you ask them, what's the Middle East like, they'll give you this kind of imagery, a Bedouin on camels in the desert. That's only a portion of the Middle East. One of the popular movies about the Middle East that's still watched is the movie Lawrence of Arabia, if you've ever seen it. This is a shot from the film Lawrence of Arabia, which kind of, it's a very romanticized view of the Middle East during World War I. And it kind of fits the image that a lot of people have and sort of recreated that image in people's minds of Bedouin, camels, deserts, things like that. People may not even realize. I mean, they would eventually realize if you ask them, can you name a city in the Middle East? Oh, yeah, right. There's cities there. Baghdad, Damascus, Istanbul, Aleppo, right? In Lebanon, Beirut, right? These cities for hundreds of years, thousands of years, have been centers of civilization and trade and cross-cultural contact. Right? Aleppo is a city in Syria that I have visited and I found to be very, very interesting and beautiful. And you can see the ancient citadel, medieval citadel, on top of a tell. Right? The foundation of Aleppo goes back to the Bronze Age and the lower levels of that tell. During the Middle Ages, it expanded. One of the things I love to do in these Middle Eastern cities is go to the souk, or the bazaar, the market. The souk in Aleppo, a lot of Aleppo obviously was damaged during the Civil War. A lot of people have lost their lives during the Civil War in Syria, right? And there's also cultural damage too. We're going to talk about that in terms of the damage to archaeological sites. So the souk was damaged. It's a World Heritage Site, and when I visited it, though, it was still intact, and it was really quite amazing. Okay, so let's look at the different cultures. We're going to look at the different environments. Right? We said the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf. We're going to look at the different environmental zones, but let's look at the different cultures today. What are the different ethnic groups that exist in the Middle East? I'm sure you can name several of them, but we would include Arabs, Turks, Armenians, Jews, Persians, Kurds, Assyrians, Druze, and others. Right? So it's a very multi-ethnic area. Ethnicity, for those of you who've taken anthropology courses, could be sometimes a difficult thing to identify or categorize, but it has nothing to do with biology. Ethnicity is based completely on culture, right? So it has to do with language, practices, food preferences, ideology, worldview, religion, things like that. All of that goes into the mix to make up an ethnic group, right? So within all of these ethnic groups, you're going to see lots of differences physically between people in terms of hair type, eye color, skin color, things like that, right? There's not an Arab race. It's an Arab ethnic group, an Arab people. And they're probably among many Arabs and among many Turks, there's genetic similarities, but there's also genetic similarities to other ethnic groups as well. They're not homogeneous genetic groupings in ethnicities. Also, you have diversity in terms of the way religion is practiced, right? So in a place like Turkey, in Istanbul, you'll see, in terms of outward demonstrations of Islamic faith, right? You might have some women wearing hijab and some women not wearing hijabs, right? So you'll have a diversity. You'll see that in Syria as well. Lots of different countries in the Middle East. You have diversity ethnically, culturally, linguistically, and also even within religious groups, you have diversity in terms of more secular, more conservative. Right? And lots of cities, especially in border areas, like this, it's a picture I took in a souk in a city called Urfa in Turkey, right near Syria. It's a melting pot where different cultures rub shoulders. So this was a Turkish student who was on our excavation, and a Arab man in the bazaar, right? And in Urfa, you have Kurds, Turks, and Arabs all together living in that city. Okay, what about languages? You have many diverse languages. So within Iran, you have many languages, and the predominant language today is Persian, which is an Indo-European language. It's a linguistic group that derives from Indo-European. English, other European languages are obviously Indo-European as well. And this is talking about the similarity and the derivation of the language. Kurdish is also an Indo-European language. Then you have Semitic languages, modern-day Semitic languages still spoken in the Middle East, Arabic, Hebrew. Syriac and Aramaic are ancient Semitic languages that are still used. So in that city Mardin I showed you before, there are still Christians there, and they pray in Aramaic, which is one of the oldest languages from the Middle East. We're going to learn a little bit about the Akkadian language, which is also a Semitic language. Then you have Turkic languages, like Turkish, which derives from Central Asia, which is where the Seljuk Turks originally derived from. Religion, obviously lots of diversity as well. Islam, Sunni and Shia. Alawi is another sect of Islam. Judaism, Christianity. People sometimes forget that some of the oldest Christian communities, were in the Middle East, not in Europe. There were churches that were built in Egypt way before, Egypt and Ethiopia, way before they were built in parts of Central and Northern Europe. Druze is another religious community. Samaritans that you read about in the Bible, like the Good Samaritan. Baha'i, which is sort of an offshoot of Islam. Yazidis, which are a very interesting group, which is a very ancient religion, still practiced in northern Iraq and southern Turkey. And Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is a religion that's based, that sort of worship of eternal flames, light and dark, good and evil, good represented by Ahura Mazda. Famous Zoroastrian personality, celebrity, is Freddie Mercury. He grew up Parsi in Zanzibar. Right? That is a Persian community He's descended from a Persian community that moved to India. That then his ancestors moved to Zanzibar. But Freddie Mercury grew up as a Zoroastrian. Yazidis believe that they worship several different deities, but they also believe that the devil needs to be placated in order that the devil doesn't cause harm to you. And sometimes people misinterpret that and call them, and this is a very negative term, they call them devil worshippers, and they're not devil worshippers. The Yazidis have been maligned a lot in history. They were attacked by ISIS, you probably remember, not that long ago. But they're a very old religious sect in the Middle East. And then within the Middle East, of course, you have different ways Islam is practiced and different ways Islamic architecture is built. So this is a mosque in Iraq, and some people note its similarity to ziggurats in Iraq as well. Okay, so next let's look at economic systems in the Middle East.